Hello and welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today we are going to be making a dice roll mechanic that is replicated and multiplayer. So we roll the dice, it picks a seed, and it rolls the same value on all of the different players when we roll the dice. I'm going to try to keep this short, sweet, and simple for you. If you want a video that is not replicated and is arguably simpler, I would urge you to check out Ryan Laley's tutorial series. I will link that in the comments section. Maybe someday I'll be able to get a card up once I get internet. So far, the only thing I have in this new project is my dice. And I got this off of Fab, but since, again, I don't have internet, all I did was come into my other project. I went over to Asset Actions, and I migrated that into my new Roll of the Dice project. That way we can rebuild everything here. Since I migrated it, all of my collision settings were automatically imported. But the only thing I changed here was collision presets to block all. I have project default set on collision complexity. You might have to do simple if your project is set up differently. And customized collision is true, because we're going to be adding a physics asset to this dice. So now I'm going to come in here. I'm going to make a new blueprint of the type actor. I'm going to call this blueprint dice. This is going to have a static mesh. That's going to be drug over the scene root because we want this to be the scene. We want it to be able to roll. And then I'm going to put my dice in there. Now, as you can see, this dice is very, very tiny. So I'm actually going to scale this up to about 10 by 10 by 10. So we have a huge dice to work with. Because I think the tiny dice is just honestly too much or too hard to see. Now we need to scroll down here and say our physics. So in this physics here, yes, we need to simulate physics. I leave the linear dampening and the angular dampening at the defaults. The mass, it should be fine at 3.8. I might change this later on. I'm not 100% sure yet. It's much smaller on my example project. Apply impulse on damage, replicate physics. All of this stuff is pretty fine, but we need a physics override material in order to actually do something with this dice. So in order to make this physics asset, what I generally do is I come over here and I search for ice, and then I find that in the content browser. And it's this one right here, this physical material for ice. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go back into my content folder, back where I made this dice, and I'm going to paste it in here. Now this is a physics material, so this is not a physics asset. Slightly different there. If I were to make a physics asset, I would need a skeletal mesh to work with. And this dice isn't a skeletal mesh. But this physics material will work just fine. I'm going to rename that to dice instead of ice. And now when I open it up, I can set all of these different things in here. So for me, I set the friction to 0.6. I set the restitution to 0.4. Keep all of this stuff I left just the way it was already. Just the default should be fine here. If you need to change this stuff later on because of maybe the dice isn't quite rolling how you want it to, that's going to be something that's up to you. But for now, we're just going to leave this generally how it was for ice. And instead of physics material ice, we're going to use physics material dice. Now, as for the collision presets, I actually set this to block all because it kept going through my floor, which was really annoying. So that's just something to keep in mind here. I also turned off generate overlap events. One more thing you're going to want to do here is have replicates on. So when you have this component replicates down here, or you can search rep component replicates, you're going to want to make sure your replication is on up here, actually, I'm sorry, in the dice itself. You're going to want to make sure that the replicates is on. So now that we have our dice in here and it is replicating, we need to add a few arrow components. This is how I do my dice anyway. Basically what I do is I add an arrow component to each side of the dice. This arrow component is pretty huge because the static mesh is set to be pretty huge. So I'm actually going to set this to 0.05. That way it's just not so huge. And I'm going to call this one here face 4. And you're going to do this for every side of your dice, so every face that your dice has. So I'll probably fast forward this a little bit. Okay, now that you've got an arrow component on all of the faces of your dice, should look something like this. If you're using more sides of the dice, that's going to be fine. But it should look something like this. We're going to use all of these different faces to basically determine which side is up based on their geometry. So let's go ahead and start working on the functionality inside of our dice. Now I had one version of this where I did it in the event tick, and I had another version where I used basically custom caller events to determine when it is settled. And we're going to use those custom caller events here. I also rolled this from itself, which is something you can decide on your own if you want to do or not, but for this tutorial we're going to roll this on itself. So we're going to call event roll self. This custom event is going to be executes on server, so run on server, and reliable. And we're going to need a couple of variables in order to determine some values later on. So the first variable I need here is an index. This helps me determine the rolled order of the dice. If you're rolling more than one dice, this is going to be very helpful. This variable needs to be replicated, just like that. Now I don't need rep notify here because the game mode is basically going to be determining all of the different things that happen with this index. But you might want rep notify here if maybe you have players joining late or some kind of latency issues. I didn't need it in my example project, so I didn't use rep notify. That's just kind of a personal thing. I don't use rep notify unless I have to because it creates a bunch of functions. It gets kind of messy. Now we need another new variable here called new seed, and this is going to be of the type random stream. And we're going to need this new seed in order to make sure that this is basically rolling the same on every single instance of the game. And we'll get into that a little bit more later on. Just for now, know that you need this new seed, and this also needs to be replicated. We're going to run what's called switch has authority next, because we want to make sure that the remainder of this logic is only happening on the authority version of the dice. We don't want it to happen anywhere else. Now, I'm not 100% sure if I need this switch, but the switch does help with just generally making sure that we are doing this from an authority, right? We're going to call set actor location. And this set actor location is basically to determine the offset when you're rolling the dice, which is why we need this rolled order, or this index. So I'm going to make a little custom function here. You could run the logic right here if you wanted to, but I'm going to make a little custom function in just a second. I'll run the logic here first, and then I will make that. So I'm going to take index plus 60 and index times 20. And don't worry too much about the math here. This is just to make sure that we are getting this all in the right place. Then we're going to add 1700 or 1780. This was the height offset. We're going to take this new location. We're going to run what's called make vector, because again I'm going to be collapsing this. And we are going to run this plus 60 into the x and this into the y. That way we're getting kind of off the ground and off of the other dice a little bit. If you do the dice right on top of each other and you try to roll them at the same time, it gets a little messy. I'm also going to put 500 in the z for now. And that's all we're going to do here. I'm going to highlight all of this, and I'm going to collapse it to a function. And I'm going to call this get dice roll at location. And that's going to be pure. We don't need an A2 here. We just need the roll order as an input. Now I probably could have kept the roll order in there, but I like these things to have inputs in case for whatever reason, right, I end up needing them later on. I'm going to queue all this stuff up so make it nice, look a little bit nicer. And then we need to set the actor rotation. And we're going to do this from a seed. Basically the same thing. We're going to make a custom little function here to get this rotation value. And this is so that they aren't just having impulse added to them. They are also having a rotation added to them, which gives the dice a little bit more spin if you saw in the video. So we're going to take this new seed, And again, I'll write this out here first, but I am going to collapse this into a function just to keep my graph clean. And we're going to do what's called random float in range from stream. Now it's important that we're passing this seed in here and not generating it here because this is going to be multiplayer. So we need the authority on the server to generate the seed. If we try to generate the seed in every instance of the dice, we're going to have a bad time. So from this new seed, we're going to put that into the stream. And then we're going to make some values here for basically X, Y, and getting a random Boolean. So try to stick with me here. At the end, we're going to make rotator. And we're going to be selecting between two different floats in stream with a random bool from stream. So for our X here, we're going to pull out, we're going to say select float. We're going to use this random bool. And this is going to determine basically if we are going positive or negative. So our min here is going to be minus 180 by minus 65. And our max here is going to be 65. Or I should say our min here is going to be 65. And our max on the second one is going to be 180. That way it's positive. You want this one to be negative and this one to be positive. And this is so that it's getting a proper amount of rotation, basically no matter what. That rotation could be positive or negative, but we don't want it to get under 65 rotation or over 180 rotation. Otherwise, it's either going to rotate too much or not enough. So it's just a little bit of a technical thing there. I'm going to duplicate this two times. And like I said earlier, we're going to be putting the seed in each of those. And then we're just going to be patching it all through. So I'm just going to take this seed. I'm only going to plug it in once. We're going to patch all of this through. And these values will be the same for all of them. That way it's getting a slightly different impulse value. Or that way it's getting a slightly different rotation value. My bad. And we'll do impulse next. I'm going to collapse all these to a function. Get random dice rotation from seed. And that is also going to be pure. And we're just going to nuzzle these up. Now, if you want to get really freaky with it, you can add in like 3 different seeds. So you can have a random for all of these, because this is going to roll exactly the same on the X, Y, and Z rotation. I think that was generally fine for me, because it's just kind of giving it spin. We're also, like I said, moving it on the location a little bit, and we're going to be adding impulse to it. So I thought this was a good amount of spin for me. But if you want to do this with 3 different seeds, maybe a seed for the X, a seed for the Y, and a seed for the Z, you're just going to have to pass in 3 different seeds into your dice. Because if we don't pass in a seed and we just get random, again, that is going to cause issues with the replication. Or at least that's my experience with replication in Unreal Engine. So now that we have that all plugged in, we are going to make a Boolean here. So I'm going to promote this to a variable, and I'm going to call this unsettled. Now this isn't actually coming off of the return value for that, and this is going to be replicated. Basically, this just means that we have rolled this dice, and we need to set a flag so that we know later on when we're trying to run things that this is not settled yet. This is going to be especially important if you do decide to do it off of event tick. But again, I had issues with the event tick. It didn't really work the way I wanted it to, so I didn't use the event tick. We have our static mesh here, which for some reason is not being replicated. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. Okay, now it's coming up as replicated for some reason. It wasn't before, now it is, now it's not. I guess it's just going to be weird. We'll have to check later on to make sure that this is being replicated, but it's being weird about it. Just a little UI glitch, I guess. We're going to add impulse. And this is where we're going to use that new seed again to calculate our impulse. So we're going to do the same thing. Basically, we're going to make vector. Now we're going to use this to get a random float in range from stream. same as we did earlier. And this one here, I did minus 500 to 500 because that kind of felt like a good range for impulse. This is going to depend on how you're doing your dice and kind of how far you want your dice to be thrown and where you're throwing your dice. I made a little, as you saw in the beginning of the video, I made a little arena for my dice. So that's what we're going to do here. Whoops, I didn't want to collapse that, my bad. I want to collapse that to a function and call that get random dice impulse from stream or seed. And that is again going to be pure. And we are just going to plug this stream into all of them. Again, if you want to have 3 different stream seeds, this would be the time where you put all 3 of the different seeds in and make your vector accordingly. That way you have a different, basically, amount on the X, Y, and Z. Or I guess you could just get this random unit vector from stream. I think this would probably also work, but I'm not 100% sure. I like using floats. And there may come a time where I actually do want to add in a different seed for each of these. That'll be as easy as just passing in 3 different seeds, right, when we run this function, or an array of seeds. I should probably call this seed and not input. But yeah, it'll basically be the same as just passing an array of seeds and then having 3 different seeds to run this with. Alright, now that we have that, we need a custom event called rolled. This custom event is also going to be run on server and reliable. And we're going to call rolled right here at the end. Now rolled, again, this is part of the reason I did this on event tick, and I'll show some logic that might work for you on event tick later on. Rolled is going to set timer by event. And it's going to call this settled event after 5 seconds. And again, this is kind of, we had issues with the event tick calculating the, basically the remaining impulse of the dice. I'll show that in a little bit. And settled is just going to be called, call a custom event here, called try settled dice, which is going to be, again, run on server reliable, because we can't make this event bound node run on server reliable unless you have some magic way of doing it that I don't know about. You can't. So why didn't I use a delay here? Because the frame rate on each client might be different. So if I run a delay of 3 seconds on one client, it might settle before it actually settles on another client, just because of the frame rate there. And we'll add our little tick node here just to kind of show some stuff. Basically, event tick, what I tried to do, and it did not work out, was I took my unsettled. I ran a branch. If that's true, and it is unsettled, I took the static mesh, got the component velocity, and tried to break it down to basically make sure that it was under a certain velocity on the X, Y, and Z. And then we would branch into that and settle it. But again, this just wasn't really working for me. And I didn't want to spend too much time on it. This little timer here works perfectly fine. It gives us that little burst of 5 seconds. You could even make this 3 seconds. I think 3 seconds is probably going to be enough time to actually roll the dice and make sure that they're done rolling. That does leave a bit of an issue, though, where you may have one off where the dice isn't 100% sorted, so it's crooked a little bit. But we'll get into that when we settle the dice right here. So on try settle dice, we're going to run switch has authority. And we're going to need to make a custom function called get top face value. What I did here is I took all of these different face values. So face 1, face 2, face 3, face 6, face 5, and face 4. And I made an array. I'm gonna nest all these up real quick. Make array. Whoop. And we're just going to plug all these in. That way we have an array to work with. We don't have to pull each of these out separately and do weird stuff with it. And then I called this get top face value function, which I am going to build as a function because we do some stuff in here. I'm going to make a new function, call it get top face value. And that is going to pull in an array, that array that we just made here. So that is an array of arrow component object references. So we need, oops, open this up a little bit so I can get to it. Arrow components object references called arrows, and that needs to be an array. That's something I usually like to do, is make sure that this will actually plug in, and it will, so that's good. Now this get top face value needs to run these through a for each with break. And this for each with break is going to get forward vector from the arrow component. And we are going to run a branch to see if this is true for vector equals vector. And yeah, that's the one I want. Vector equals vector. Because vector equals vector is going to give us this margin of error, which I'm going to set to 0.5. And this z here is going to be 1. So if our forward vector is equal to 1 with a margin of error of 5, this is going to return true. You might need to fiddle with this exact functionality a little bit, depending on the size of your dice, how hard you're rolling them, how long it's taking to roll them, all of that stuff, but yeah, this is what's going to work. And then we're going to take our array index, and we're going to promote this to a local variable. Anyway, we're going to call this L index. Index, not indice. And off of true, we're going to set that local index. We're going to route back here to break because we have found the right one, the one that we want, the one that's side is up, and we're good to go. I'm going to call a return node here. And I'm going to use this local index to select an integer. So we're going to return a single integer called rolled number. And this is where you would do your reroll logic, essentially. We're going to select an integer, take this local rolled index, select A if it is equal to -1, and select B, which is the local index plus 1, because 0 is counted as an index here, and put that into B. Now, why are we checking -1 here? Because we need to know if this actually rolled something positive, right? If it rolled a value. If we roll through this entire loop and it hits false for whatever reason every single time, then because we set our local index to -1, it's going to return -1. Now we have a way to basically run an error check, which I didn't do in my example project, and I don't want this video to be 10 hours long, so I'm not going to get too deep into that. But basically you would check and see if this rolled number is equal to -1 and then try to re-roll the dice. So for now, I'm going to promote this to a variable, and we're going to call this rolled number. You guessed it. This needs to be replicated. And then we're going to get our game state. And this is where we'll need to make a custom game state object. So I used game state instead of game mode for mine. But it's going to be up to you whether you use the game state or the game mode. I think the game state's just a slightly better place to do this. I'm going to blueprint class. all classes, game state. And we're going to use this game state base. I'm going to call this game state custom for now. You don't want to call this whatever your game is. And now that I have this, I can cast into it. Or you could make a BPI here, which is something I might do later on. I'm not 100% sure in my actual project whether I'm going to do that later on or not. But for now, it's fine just casting into here. And we're going to make a custom event inside of this game state called ROS calculate dice roll, which is going to be run on server reliable. For now, that's all we need to do is call that event in here. I called it ROD, my bad. Anyway, that's all we need to do in here for now. I just wanted to get that called here. Again, if you're using a BPI or something, I'm not 100% sure why you would, but you might if you don't want, for whatever reason, a reference to your game state in your dice. The game's not going to play without the game state, so casting into it here is perfectly fine. And that actually, my bad, that needs to take an integer of rolled number. So I'm going to add an input of rolled number, because we need to do stuff with that rolled number. Otherwise, yeah, nothing's ever gonna happen. Huh? That's right, because it's replicated. It has to be named first, and then a new parameter. Gotta compile it in here first, then come back over here, refresh that again. Now it should let me do it. Yay! So now there was one more thing I did want to mention this, check for the rolled number, just in case you do have a one-off. You would basically get your rolled number, you would check to see if it is equal to -1 up here before you call this stuff to the game state. And then you would branch, and if it is equal to -1, you would call probably roll self again with the same index and seed. Or you could call something inside of your game state, which is what's calling this in the first place, to do something like and I botched the spelling on that as well. Generate new dice seed for index, and you would pass in that integer of index, and then you would regenerate a seed and then tell the dice to roll itself again. So you would come out here and say generate new dice seed for index or something like that. And that's going to help you basically get that error margin down. I haven't had a single error. I've rolled these dice hundreds of times, and I haven't had a single issue where I actually rolled -1 on my index or on my rolled number. But you might want to, again, check that if that is -1. That's why we made that little error there where it'll pull -1 if it doesn't roll anything for whatever reason. And roll it again, right? Or generate a new seed and roll it again if that's the issue. But I'm not too worried about that here. Again, I've never had an issue with it. Maybe we'll run into an issue with this video and I'll regret deleting all that. But that is how you would probably handle a reroll of the dice. Anyway, that is everything in our dice component itself. So we have the roll self, which just takes an index and a new seed, runs it on the switch, gets the dice location, which just slightly offsets the dice so they're not on top of each other, gets a random rotation from seed, so we do that to set the actor rotation, sets this unsettled variable, which we don't actually need here, but it sets this unsettled bool if you're going to use event tick to do this, and does this add impulse on the new seed and rolled. And same thing, if you wanted to do it on the event tick, you would be getting the velocity or getting the impulse off of the dice itself. So out of the static mesh, you would get velocity probably. Or run a little bit of logic there to make sure that your velocity, that you're no longer rolling. But again, with the parameters that I put in, it never takes more than 3 seconds to roll the dice, and I think 3 seconds is a good amount of time to have a dice roll. And let them settle. Now, I mentioned that all of this was being done inside of the game state, right? I mentioned all of this was being done inside of the game state. So we're going to go ahead and set up all of the different things that happen here. Luckily for me, I only have 3 things in my custom roll dice graph. So we are going to do that. I have a bunch of different graphs here, so try to stick with me if I miss anything. Basically, the first thing we're going to do is make a custom event called ROS roll dice. This is going to be run on server, reliable. And this is where we're going to make that dice seed. So I made a custom function called make random dice seed. What this does is it gets UTC now. It breaks the date time. It takes the hour plus the minutes plus the second plus 52. This 52 is just an arbitrary number. And then it multiplies it by 64. And again, these are just arbitrary numbers. That way we are getting kind of like a unique roll. We're not just getting the hour, minute, and second. This diversifies that a little bit so that basically if you roll in the same hour, minute, and second, you always get the same exact dice roll, which is kind of cheesy. I might change this later on to do something like get current turn, but if current turn is 0, then we have to run a selector here and check and see if it's 0, if it's not 0, and we're not doing turns here either, so something to keep in mind there is you might want to multiply this by turns or add turns and then multiply turns if you want something that is 100% reliable that you can replicate anytime. But for me, my case, I just think plus 52 and times 64 is going to be perfectly fine. We're going to use this to make random stream, and I'm going to collapse all of this to a function. I'll make random dice seed. This can be pure since we are going to be outputting that seed instead of setting it. Doop. Call this new seed. If you're setting it inside of here, I think you'd have to do this in pure. But I am not. I am setting it out here. Oh, whoops, get back to my dice roll graph. I'm going to promote that to a variable called, you guessed it, dice seed. That is going to have to be replicated. Yes, 100%. 100% has to be replicated. And then I have another variable here called dice roll total. Oops. Whoops. Of the type integer. And this one does need to be rep notify. Because you might have instances where not everybody's synced up properly and you need to rep notify the end position of the dice. I didn't do that in my example project. I don't think I used the dice. Yeah, I didn't use the dice roll total at all yet. But you might need that to be rep notify. Again, if you have maybe a latency issue or you want basically players who didn't see the dice roll to be able to get an update of the dice roll, you're going to want this to be with rep notify to handle edge cases. Then I have another custom event called multicast view dice roll. Now this multicast event gets a little complicated. I'm not going to lie to you, we might not do that here. But basically I call this multicast view dice roll. And this is what takes the player camera and we set it to a different camera, which is the dice roll camera, which is a static camera over the dice arena. I'll probably go ahead and do that here, or at least a light version of it, but this does get a little messy. So what I did here is I get all actors of class of the type my custom player controller, so we'll need to go ahead and make a custom player controller real quick. And basically, we shouldn't need this get all actors of class. We should already have references to all of our player controllers, but it gets a little finicky, especially when you're developing things. It's easier to just have this here. And inside of that custom player controller, that is where we made the custom event. Switch to dice cam, which actually switches this over to the dice cam, which is run on owning a client and reliable. And it's important that this was run on owning client because the controller needs to be run on the owning client. And that is what happens here. We had another event in there which removed the gameplay HUD as well, so you're probably going to want to remove whatever HUD elements you have that would interfere with the visuals of the dice, or stop input if you're moving around in the game or something, but I thought this was perfectly fine. And we're going to run switch has authority, and you might need a delay here. Again, this gets a little messy with multiplayer because if one instance of the game is running at a slightly higher frame rate than another instance of the game, you're going to get issues with this. Because the switch to dice roll cam actually takes 2 seconds. So you could set timer by event here, like we did earlier, and say 2 seconds. We'll just go ahead and do that. We'll make a custom event, try roll dice. Which will again have to pass into another custom event, which is the unfortunate part about timers, right? Called roll dice, which needs to be run on server reliable. And that's kind of why I did a delay in most of my prototyping, because it's just way easier than doing all of these different timers and functions. But basically, yeah, we're probably going to have to do that here. So we'll just call this roll dice. This is going to call roll dice. And roll dice needs to run this switch has authority. And then we need a reference to all of our dice. So we didn't get that yet. We get that on begin play. So we have a custom event here called ROS start game. And when you're running a multiplayer game with the game state as the manager, you're going to have to do a ton of logic before you can really even start your game. Basically to get valid references to all of your players. The player states need to do stuff. They need to initialize themselves. They need to set player orders. They need to do a lot of stuff. You have rules in your game, which are probably going to be in your game state or your game mode. You're going to have to run some kind of initialization functionality here, right? Turn counters, game state, like what game phase is currently active. But what I did here at the end, I'm not going to go through all of that stuff. What I did here at the end is I just spawn the dice actors. So we're going to spawn BP dice, and we're going to spawn BP dice. Way over to BP dice. And I only used 2 dice for my game, so we only spawned 2 dice. I'm going to do this, promote this to a variable, call this dice, delete it, and turn it into an array. And then I'm going to add dice to that dice array. Same thing down here. This dice needs to get added to the dice array. If you're doing more than 2 dice, then you're going to have to add all of them to the array during your start game logic. So whatever your game is initializing, you're going to have to spawn your dice actors. Otherwise, you're not going to have dice in the game. And I didn't want to spawn my dice every single time I roll the dice, because then I'm going to end up spawning and despawning thousands of dice over gameplay, and that's just not going to be a good time. So that's why we have these 2 dice getting spawned as soon as the game starts and added to the array. And they get spawned at a very specific location. This location is probably going to change when we make our little dice arena later on. So for now, don't worry too much about that, but we are going to have to set a location for these. That way they actually spawn into the dice arena, because we are going to be moving them. That's why I said this movement logic as well might have to change, because we are putting them kind of at a location, right? To roll them in the little container that we roll them. So for now, we just need to spawn them and get them in an array so we can actually continue on with our tutorial. So now that we have them in an array, I'm going to get this dice roll, or get this dice, and we're going to start rolling the dice. So rolling the dice, oh, this also needs to be replicated, by the way. My bad if I didn't do that. Pretty much everything inside of your game state is going to be replicated. We're going to run a for each loop on authority, which I don't think you'll ever not have authority here, but we did on authority. And we're going to call roll self. The index needs to be the array index, and the seed, you guessed it, is this dice seed. And basically this is just going to loop through all of the dice that we are using in our game and tell them they need to go ahead and roll, which is all that logic we already built out. So we need one more function in here to calculate the dice roll total. So we need another custom event here called ROS calculate dice roll. And that is going to take in, whoops, we already have that, my bad. ROS calculate, I don't know how I spelled them differently. But yeah, this ROS calculate dice roll is what we're going to need to do now. So switch as authority. Again, we want to make sure that this is always on the authoritative. We're going to take this new roll and we're going to add it to a... I don't need two of these. We're going to add it to a variable that we already have called dice roll total, because we need to get a total of all of the dice rolled. And then we're going to set dice roll total with that new value. That is why we reset this. If you remember correctly, when we roll the dice, we reset this value. That way it's always kind of back at 0. We have a dice counted variable here as well, which is also an integer. And this is so that we know how many dice we have counted in the game. We're going to increment that. And then we're going to check and see if that equals the amount of dice that we have in our game. For us, that is 2. You could use a last index or length based on your array of dice if you wanted to. I know that I'm just using 2 dice here, so there's no reason to go that far. But if you're using more than 2 dice or a variable amount of dice, you're going to want to set that up. And once that is done, we need to basically send the information over to the player or do whatever it is you're doing with that dice roll total. For us here in this example project, we are just going to print a really long duration string of 20 seconds on the color, I guess, purple of that dice roll total, because we're not actually running any logic on this. You would want to use this to, move the player, or in our Catan demo, roll for resources, roll for turn order, do whatever it is you're doing with that, and then, handle it that way. But for this example, we are just going to print that string. That way we know what the dice has rolled. And we need to do this again. But instead of switching to dice cam, we need to return to normal cam. And this is largely going to be something that you decide to do on your own, whether you even want to do this or not. But yeah, that's what we did in our little Catan demo, so I will try to do it here as well. Because the game cam and the dice cam are just in 2 separate places, I think it looks nice to pan over to a game cam and pan back over to a dice cam. But I'm also not allowing the player to move around. You're kind of stuck, locked in, looking at the table. We might add a little bit of movement later on, but for now, this is fine. You're going to want to restore your gameplay HUD or do any other logic you need to do here as well. And then when this is completed, you're going to cast into your player state and have them end the turn or do whatever needs to happen next, but we don't have any of that here, so we're not going to do any of that. Now I need one more thing here. I need a custom game mode in order to actually handle all of this stuff. We're not going to do too much inside of that game mode, but I do need a way to actually set up all of the game states. So game state is going to be game state custom. Player controller is the player controller custom. Player state I don't think I need to make here either, so I'm not going to make it, but you would want your player state custom in there as well. And our game mode, select game mode, needs to be the game mode custom. So yeah, let's go ahead and make our dice roll arena. We're going to need another blueprint here. I made this an actor. I'm going to call this BP Dice Mat. And you can get freaky with this dice mat if you really want to. I did not. I added some planes. And I made these kind of big. My bad. I used a cube instead of a plane on this. And yeah, 0.5, 2.5. There we go. That's better. Yeah. Again, you just want to make some kind of box, basically, to say that the dice cannot roll out of this box. Now, if you wanted to, you could take this cube, you could make a custom static mesh, and just like we did with the ice or the dice, you could add a physics material here. So something like rubber would get pretty interesting. I'm not going to do that yet. Maybe we'll do that at the end of the video. But for now, all we actually need this for is just to be in the world as a box. That is all this is doing. You're going to want to, again, decide on your own how buoyant you want to make it. If you want to make it bouncy, if you want to make these curved a little bit, or a little bit cooler, that's going to be totally up to you. So let's put this at a fair location. Yeah, we're going to put this at 0 down here. I guess 480. Let's just do 500. That way it doesn't take me an hour to figure out where all this stuff is. So 500 minus 1,000, 0. And like I mentioned earlier, we're going to have to come into our game state now and spawn our dice at the proper location. Just 400 and minus 1,000. And the Z here, I think we need to do 100. Let's do 100 on the Z, and we'll see what happens. Ooh, not 4,000, 400. Excuse me. You're going to be 380 by minus 980, again by 100. So let's go ahead and press play, see what happens. We will press F10, F8 to eject. Just because I want to see if my dice actually spawned in here. They did not. Oh, you know what? I know what happened. My bad. Well, we didn't actually call it anywhere either. So, yeah. Now that I have this here, I wonder if I can actually jump into it. I can. I can see into it, which is perfect because I want to be able to see into it. But inside of our game mode custom, we actually do need to get the game state and call this ROS start game. So inside of the game mode, on begin play, we're going to get the game state. We're going to cast into our custom game state. And we're going to run this run on server start game. Otherwise, the dice aren't actually going to spawn. So now our dice should be spawning into this little arena. Well, if I put the dice... if I put the dice in the right spot, we'll do 1,200 or 1,200 by 1,800 this time. So again, back in my game state, 1,200, 1,800. Offset them by about 20. This is still at 0, so that should be good. Now our dice should be spawning in here. No. The dice still not spawning in here. Oh, I guess because the world override is still set. That's my bad. Another oversight there. Hello, hello. And yes, our dice did spawn, so that is excellent. It's perfect. And I don't need my player character anymore, so I'm not too worried about him not being in the scene. So what we did here was we made a Cine camera actor. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to search blueprint class. We're going to search Cine for a Cine camera actor. I'm going to call this BP dice cam. I'm going to drag dice cam just right into the world over the dice cam, or the dice arena. Make sure we rotate it so it's looking at the arena. And I'll let you get weird with your camera as much as you want. Basically, yeah, we're just going to up this to like right here should be fine. And you'll want to adjust the trajectory and do all that fun stuff. But I think that's perfectly fine. We didn't do any kind of code or logic inside of there, so that'll be okay. Now our switch to dice cam is going to get a reference to the dice cam, so we need a reference to the dice cam. So what we're going to do is just get actor of class BP dice cam. You're probably going to want to promote this to a variable, check and see if it's valid, but I'm just going to get it every time. We're going to do set view target with blend. The blend time is going to be 1.5 seconds. And switch to game camera, again, is going to kind of be something you have to decide on your own. Whether or not you are using a game camera. Like for me, I use this BP Cinecam. I also use BP Game Cam in mine. So the game cam is more like up here and viewing the game board. But that's just going to have to be something that you decide on your own, unfortunately. I am not 100% great when it comes to swapping cameras and stuff yet. I'll be honest with you. I'm having a bit of issue in my own project with this. Getting back to like a movable player camera. I think it is get pawn and get camera or set view target with blend, I guess. We can try that and see what happens. But I did have a lot of issue with this in my own project, being able to restore the camera and move back to it. But, you know, we're just worried about rolling the dice here. So we're going to switch to the dice cam. And we're going to do all of this on a debug key 1 get game state. Cast into the game state. And roll the dice. ROS roll dice is what I want. I don't know why I have 2 roll dices. You probably don't want 2 roll dices. You'll probably want this to be ROS start roll dice. And then we'll call ROS start roll dice. That way there's like an actual sequence. It goes through all of the different player controllers and does what it needs to do. But for now... Oh. Yeah, we actually gotta put our dice roll, like I said, the rollout location back to a normal kind of value. So it is this 1780, I believe. That is our kicker here. Oh, and this Z order of 500. So I believe that is 20. And we want this to be plus the actual location, which is 1800. So that should be okay. Let's go ahead and press play, see what happens now. Press my 1 key. And my dice went off into the stratosphere again. Oh no. Oh. Ah, it did work. Huh? We went right back to the flying pawn. Anyway, where the heck did my dice go? Why the heck are they down here? Is that just where they're going? Ah, it's just where they're going. Alright, well. Screw with me, dice. No, we're not going to do that. I think it's this X value, right, that we would actually need to be plus 1200. And we could probably multiply that by 20 as well. See what happens. Let's see what happens. Now when I press my 1 key, hopefully these actually roll. Hey, they did. They rolled right in there. Press my 1 key again. We're just going to keep rolling the dice. And we rolled them right off the edge. And that -2 basically means they did not have time to roll all the way. So what we're going to do here is we could tone these down a little bit. But I think maybe I'll just actually add more weight to the dice. We'll kind of play around with this a little bit. Yeah, for some reason our timer is only working the first time. So what I'm going to do is just promote this to a variable, which is something I normally do anyway. I was just being lazy here, trying to get this done as soon as possible. And then we're going to get this, clear and invalidate it. Same thing in the dice. Which I'm honestly not 100% sure timer's even going to work with the multiplayer. But we're going to find out, aren't we? Then I'm going to grab this timer handle and clear and invalidate it. Let's try one more time. Okay. Just threw the dice to the friggin' moon. For now, let's actually just go ahead and stop the rotation altogether. And for the impulse, let's set this to 250 by 250. Since we had way too much oomph on that dice. Okay, 6 and 4 makes 10. 6 and 5 makes 11. But unfortunately, nothing happened again. So there must be something I am not resetting here, right? So we set our dice roll total. Set our dice counted. You know what it is? We are not resetting our dice counted anywhere. So down here, after this for each loop where we return to the game cam, let's set our dice counted back to 0. Let's try that. Press my 1 key. Okay, big nothing. That's why we add all those extra values, by the way. Okay, and now it is working as intended. So if I pull all of these over, I press 1. I press 1 from my server. And it is going to work. Now, you might be wondering why it's only working on the server, and that's because we have it called from the player controller. Is instead of calling this here on the debug key 1 like this, we would actually make a custom event. I know I was being a little lazy there, called ROS player roll dice. And you would want some way to know which player is rolling this dice and all of that jazz. But for now, we're just going to make this run on server reliable. We're just going to say ROS player roll dice. I know, server stuff can be very annoying because you have to do that in like everything. And now when I press 1, they're all going to go ahead and roll the dice. We rolled a 9. It's perfect. I'm going to press 1 again. It's going to pan in here. One of them went off screen. We rolled a 5. And that's something with the camera you're going to want to adjust. Rolled an 8. I know it's kind of hard to see here anyway because these screens are all so friggin' tiny. And we rolled a 9, so we know that it is all replicating. It's all doing what we want it to do perfectly fine here. So I think we'll do a little bit of a recap. I'll move this up. We'll test it a few more times just to be super sure. And I'll just do 2 screen. We see both of them coming in here. We rolled an 8. And both of them coming in here. We rolled a 9. And we see both of them coming in here. And we rolled a 10. So, yeah, I know it's a little bit weird on the rolls, but that is what we wanted, right? The dice are rolling, they're replicated, everything is working as intended for this little dice roll tutorial. Now I'm going to go through and do a couple of other things. I probably cut out the part where I was testing stuff, but we're going to basically return this set actor rotation, because I think that was pretty cool to have in there. We'll press play and show it real quick. It kind of adds, I don't know, a little bit extra. And the server rolled a 0 because we had this dice that did not want to roll properly. So we rolled a 1 and a -1. This is where you would want that check I was talking about earlier. So maybe we will make that check real quick. And again, that would be, we'll just do it in the dice. I think it'll be fine in the dice. So we'll check this rolled number equals -1. We'll branch. And if it does, we'll recall roll self. And we'll just recall it from here. I think this will work with its seed and index. I think this will work. Not that there's ever going to be a time when we actually get that one off again to show it, but I think that'll work. And this might be where something like a minimal value also comes into play, where we have that little flop that happens there, because that does happen quite a bit. It's kind of annoying. That's kind of the nature of seeds. You're going to, again, want to make sure you set better minimums. It's part of why we added in rotation. That's part of why we added in the velocity. But the dice are in here. They are rolling. They're just sometimes flopping, which is really not what we want. Let's take our friction back down to 0.6. Let's put this back down to 1. Let's try to add a little bit of basically guarantee in here that is not going to happen. Which is why we had our minimum at 500, 500. I see the problem. We need to do basically the exact same thing when we did our rotation from seed, where we have a positive and negative minimum. That is the problem. So we would run this random stream again from bool to a select. Turn value A is going to be negative, so it's going to be minimum of -500 to -250. B is going to be 250 to 500, let's say. This might actually be too much spin. Not 100% sure yet. Delete that, delete that. That is what I want, so boom, 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 boom. And again, having multiple seeds would probably also solve that issue for the most part. That way you're getting a different value for the X, Y, and Z impulse. That's just something that's totally up to you. I didn't want to confuse you guys by trying to make a bunch of different seeds and stuff. I guess I probably confused you anyway, though, huh? Anyway, press 1 again. 6. 6. Huge dice roll there. Huge 12. Huge 12. Big 2. And again, if you're having issues where they're constantly going over the edge, or you're just not getting enough, you see, that was better. That probably would have flopped beforehand, right? So, yeah, I think we're getting much better rolls here. Again, it is very, very rare that it actually... I pressed 1 too quickly. It is very rare that it actually lands on an edge, which is why I didn't worry too much about edge casing. You like my pun? But I think that little check in there to see if it is -1 will work perfectly fine. You, again, might want to go into the game state and run it there. To redo the seed, you might have to do something like that. Okay, weird-ass roll. You might have to do something like that with the seed in the game state if it is still not working with that reroll. But no, I think this is probably going to be fine, right? I think this is probably going to be fine. Boop. Big 7. Big 6. Yeah, so I would say this is working as intended. One more thing I did want to try, because I didn't get around to doing this in my other project, so I want to set this physics material to rubber or metal or something and see what happens. Because I think you could probably have a lot of fun with your physics material if you were to basically extend the edges a little bit just to make sure you're never going out of bounds. I think you could do a lot of really cool stuff with this. Yeah, look at him bounce now. So now you've got even more randomness because the physics is bouncing back out of that. I can't actually see this stuff over here, though. Yeah, it doesn't really matter which one. Try to squint. Okay, well, maybe it is too bouncy. Big 10. So it looks like, yeah, it's still replicating fine. Yeah, big 5. So I think that's fine. We might want to not use rubber here. I think this could be a really cool little thing, though. So I just kind of wanted to throw it out there. That you can use this little dice mat, which is what I plan on doing in my Catan series probably, is making a custom physics material for that as well. Something that has a good amount of bounciness, that isn't too bouncy. And if it's taking too long to roll your dice, make that timer 4 seconds instead of 3. I think 3 seconds is perfect here. But if you're adding like a ton of bounciness to your dice or whatever, you're going to want to run that a little bit longer. But no, I think we're good here. I better end this video before we get too deep in the paint, right? I better end this video before it ends up 2 hours because we're already looking at an hour and a half. So this is our little replicated dice mechanic game thing. We're just rolling the dice on a board. So we have our blueprint for our dice. Our blueprint for our dice has this main event here, which is roll self. This takes an index and a seed from the game state. If it has authority, we set the dice roll location up and over just a little bit so they're kind of offset from each other. That way they're not trying to roll right on top of each other. So we set that actor location up in the air and offset a little bit. We get some random rotation values from seed as well with mins and maxes and a random bool from stream. So we are always getting basically a minimum of 65 degrees and a maximum of 180 degrees on either direction of the rotation for every single axis. If you want to do multiple seeds here, you'll just have to take in multiple seeds from the roll self from the game state. We're setting this unsettled bool, which is unsettled. It has never done anything in here, but if you're using event tick to try to determine the velocity or the remaining impulse of your dice, you're going to want a boolean here to make sure that you have something to stop the event tick from always ticking. Finally, we are adding impulse to the dice, which again does the same thing as rotation. We just get a random impulse of minus 500 to 250, basically between 250 impulse and 500 impulse. This is going to be up to you, kind of how you set up your games, how you set up your physics material, all that stuff. But you just want to make sure you have a min and a max, that way they don't flop like we saw earlier. And then we are running this rolled event. This is reliable, runs on the server, which roll self is also reliable, runs on the server. This event, all it does is set a timer. This is so we don't have to use event tick, because the event tick just wasn't working the way I wanted it to. So all we're doing is setting a timer of 3 seconds and getting the timer handle. When that 3 seconds is up, we are calling a custom event called settled, which needs to run a custom event that runs on the server. If we could run this on the server, we would. But we need an event that runs on the server and is reliable. So we run try settle dice, and we go ahead and clear out that timer handle. We don't need it anymore right here. Just like that delay node we don't need. And try settle dice just again checks to see if you have the authority, gets all of the faces of your dice, gets the top face value by running through a loop of all of your faces, getting its forward vector, seeing if that forward vector is 0, 0, 1 on the Z, with an acceptance range of 0.5. You're going to have to adjust this as needed based on your dice. And then if all of that is true, then we have our index for our dice. If that index is -1, which is the default value, we need to return -1 because that is an error. We need to reroll this dice or do something else with it. If not, we need to add 1 to the local index because if you already know, 1 is 0, 2 is 1, 3 is 2, etc., etc. We need to be adding 1, otherwise we're not getting a proper value. And then once we have that proper value, we're going to set that to our rolled number, which is replicated. We're going to check and see if that equals -1. If it equals -1, we need to re-roll. You might want to do this in the game state, which we're about to talk about the actual rolling functionality. Or we take our index and our new seed back in and we just go ahead and roll it again. Hopefully it works this time. You might want to again change the seed a little bit if it is constantly erroring or something. Maybe make a 1, 2, 3 debounce here or something of that nature, or just go right into the game state and do that. If everything checked out, we didn't roll a -1, we go into our game state and we calculate the dice roll. Calculate the dice roll in the game state, takes in that rolled number, takes our dice roll total, adds the rolled number to the dice roll total, sets the dice roll total, increments our dice counted. We use 2 dice in this game. If you're using a variable amount of dice, you're going to want to use the dice array you get when you spawn the dice to figure out how many dice you have in your game, or set it to a different number. Up to you. We're only using 2 here, so we only need to put 2. If that is true, we have rolled both of our dice. We are printing our total. You're going to want to run whatever logic here. Move player amount of spaces on the board, assort resources, assign resources, set player order, do whatever you are trying to do here with your dice. We're just printing a string. Then we're getting all of our player controllers and telling all of our player controllers to switch back to the game camera. And we are setting our dice counted back to 0. Off of this completed, you're going to want to do something like a set next player turn or set next game phase. But we are keeping this simple for this tutorial, otherwise we will be here for a month trying to explain this stuff. Now what all actually happens inside of this game state? Well, we start with this start game function, which gets called from the game mode. The only thing we did in the game mode is on event begin play, we cast into our game state and we call this start game. This is going to be to set up your game. This is going to be pretty important for you to do. You're going to have to do all of your different logic on here where you're casting into your player states and basically just setting all of your configuration up. This is going to be a lot of logic in here. You're going to want a loading screen. Anyway, our run on server start game, for this example, all it does is spawn a couple of dice at the location of the little dice thing we put in the world, which is this little dice arena. This dice mat is just a cube with some edges, that way the dice doesn't roll out, and we gave it a physics material at the end. You don't have to do that. That's just going to add a little bit of extra bounciness or less bounciness to the material of the cube. So just something to keep in mind there, a little bit of fun extra. Anyway, once we spawn those in that little dome, we are good to go. We're just going to print a string that lets us know we have done it. Now, when we go to roll the dice, we run this ROS start roll dice. This makes a random dice seed. We used our minute second plus 52 plus or times 64 to make a random stream, and set that to our seed. You're going to want to use, again, whatever you're using here, probably amount of turns played or something reliable that you can replicate for debugging. But, you know, we just wanted to use our minute second. I'm not too worried about replicating this or repeating exact seeds for dice rolls. There's just going to be a bunch of dice rolls, and when an error happens, I'm just going to have to figure it out because I'll never remember anyway. Anyway, our ROS start roll dice gets that dice roll seed, sets our dice roll total to 0. That way we don't have an issue where there is a lingering total. And run this multicast view dice roll. Multicast view dice roll again gets all the player controllers. There's better ways to do this. You could probably honestly set up when you set up the game itself to get all the player controllers once. That way you don't have to run this get all actors of class every single time. Set it to an array, and then you can use that array to run this for each loop, which just switches to the dice cam and sets a timer to wait 2 seconds. We need to wait 2 seconds because it takes 2 seconds to pan into that dice cam. Then we run our try roll dice, which once again needs to make a replicated version of itself to be able to run on the server, which is what this roll dice function is, and then we just clear that timer handle so it's not lingering. Our roll dice function, just switch has authority, make sure it is in fact running on the server. It should be here. We're going to roll through all of our dice array, and we are going to tell each one to roll itself with that dice seed. This is kind of where you would want to put in a custom event to roll dice with seed, where you would take in an index of the dice. That way you know which dice to tell to re-roll itself if you need a re-roll. That is going to be a little more reliable to basically fix any issues where you get crooked dice than actually just telling it to roll itself. Because if it rolls itself with the exact same seed, it's probably going to roll in the exact same way. So something to keep in mind there. That is all that is happening inside of this game state as well. Our physics material for our dice, we just set the friction to 0.6, restitution 0.4, 1, 0.5, and 4 on the sleep threshold. Basically, all this stuff is pretty much defaults. You're going to have to come in here and play around with this as much as you want. We used ice to duplicate it and make this physics material. Inside of our player controller, switch to dice cam. Just gets all actors of class dice cam. You're going to want to do this on begin play. That way you don't have to get the actor every single time. Or if you have assigned cameras for each player, you're going to want to go ahead and figure out which one the player controller is assigning itself to and set that up on begin play as well. And we're just setting the view target with a blend over 1.5 seconds. That goes over to the camera. Return to game just gets the player pawn and sets that view target with blend again. That way it pans back over to the player. Our debug key 1 runs this run on server player roll dice, which needs to be run on server to work. That just calls into the game state, casts into it, and rolls the dice. Alright, that is it. I think I covered everything. If you have any questions or comments, let me know down in the comments section below. I think we did a fairly okay job of explaining this. I know we went in circles a little bit there, but I think we all kind of get the general idea of what's going on here. We press the key, we pan over the dice cam, we roll the dice go bounce, they calculate, and we turn back into the game. Now it's time to play the game again, do whatever else was going on with the turn, right? So again, Ryan's video is honestly a lot shorter and explains this probably better if you don't need replicated dice. Maybe check out Ryan's tutorial if this one was a little bit too complicated or I lost you in some places. Or just let me know in the comments section below and I can try to help explain things a little bit better for you. But I think this is a fairly reliable way to make a dice roll mechanic in your game, nice and replicated. I think an hour and a half isn't really too much time to spend on that. And I'll probably get that cut down a little bit by editing the video. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you have any ideas for new videos, let me know in the comments section below, and I will try to get to them. Bye-bye.